Our next variation of kind of the extensions of Mendel, and in the last video, if you did not see right at the beginning, I talked about how in Mendelian genetics, what you're dealing with is a one-gene situation. The trait only is dealt with because of one gene, and that gene has a dominant variation allele and a recessive allele. So dominant, recessive, and we notated it as such. All right. Every time A was in front, the dominant version was in front of the recessive, then it would showcase the dominant phenotype. Everything was pretty standard. And then last video you talked and learned about a situation where it's called incomplete dominance. The next one that we're going to talk about today is called codominance, and sadly, it is going to be mixed up very much with incomplete dominance. It just goes with the territory that they're very, very close. You have to decipher it, and it's something that you have to just be trained to recognize. So codominance, you're still dealing with a trait that is caused by one gene. But just like incomplete dominance, neither gene is going to be recessive. So it's kind of like they are both dominant. So what happens? It doesn't really impact if you are homozygous for the first allele, or doesn't recognize or matter if you're homozygous for the second. You're going to showcase that phenotype. But what is the issue is, again, that hybrid situation where you pair this allele with this allele. What's going to happen? So I'll give you an example right off the top. We can look at an example where you have a allele that codes for the color. This sometimes I've seen examples where it's potentially a chicken example where it's still, even in incomplete dominance, there's examples of chickens that they use. So this is another example. I'll kind of give you a secondary horse example. These are the most common ones that I've often seen. So we have a dominant trait that codes for a phenotype of black, and we have a phenotype that codes for a white. In incomplete dominance, then what would happen if you paired the black allele with the white allele, then they would blend together in some capacity. But with codominance, there is no blending situation. They want to showcase themselves, but they don't showcase by blending. They showcase by staying independent of one another. So the way the notation has to be is we can't notate it the same exact way we did incomplete dominance, where we give it a capital B or a capital W. That would really confuse people that understood what was going on. So there has to be a secondary option. So what I do is you pick a base letter. I choose C, as long as it's not going to be something that's going to be related to the letters that you're probably going to notate for black or white. It's just a base letter, because in order to showcase codominance, you actually need a superscript. So you can't have a superscript without a base letter. So I'm going to choose C, no reason why. But with black, then the allele for black is going to be written as an uppercase superscript. So there's no lowercase because they are still both dominant. So something that would be of a black phenotype, I'm going to rewrite the base letter for the second allele and then do a second superscript. So you're doing a superscript, but it's still going to be in capitalized letters, so it shouldn't be too confusing. This would showcase the phenotype black. Then if I go to the next extreme, I'm going to take the white variation. I'm going to still use the same base letter, and it will be a W, capitalized. I really don't have to worry because I'm not going to try and figure out if it's recessive. So that is perfectly fine. I'm probably not going to be confused by my handwriting. But what will happen is when you get a variation where they're both showcasing the heterozygous state, we don't blend them together. It really would be written as black and white. So you might think, like, is this like spots? Chickens I don't think have spots, but you could think of it as some of the feathers would be black, some of the feathers would be white. They stay independent of one another. But if my goal for you is to make sure you have one example that makes sense to you. So if you think of this example, then you say, how did I notate? How did I write the genotypes? Because if you start mixing the genotypes together, the interpretation of those genotypes is the issue for someone that understands what you're trying to communicate. So that's an example. If I did, like we did last time, if I cross a black and white chicken with a white chicken, so the genotypes are written above, what I do is I'm going to separate my gametes out. It's just a monohybrid cross. So I am going to do a simple monohybrid, cross it with a white, separate those alleles out. I'm just keeping my alleles in check. If it has a B, I'll put it first. It just keeps my mindset. I can read a little easier. All right, so that would be proper notation. Do not put both alleles as the superscript. So I've seen it in the past, so I warn you, don't write them like that. That is not how you do it. Wrong. you rewrite the base because technically the allele is the base letter with the superscript. So then this would be a 2 black and white versus 2 white chickens. Okay, so that's an example of, the chicken. There is another common example. I'm going to slide this over. So the other common example is with horses, and they do a red horse, a white horse, and the third option is something you have to be trained to recognize. It's called Roan, and for an outsider, someone who never has ridden a horse, I've never ridden a horse, but this is just through all the readings that I've done with textbooks. Roan is a horse where, if you are a horse lover, maybe you know about this, it's not a pink horse, because remember in our incomplete dominant situation, red and white, when they blend together, they made pink. Not a pink horse. But it's also not spotted either. Instead, the hairs are so intermixed that from a distance it kind of blends together, but that's because your eyes are blending them. But if you went up to that horse and just plucked a hair off of it, there might be a potential that it's more of a reddish hair, or there'd be a potential that it's more white. So the way that we're going to notate that, I'll pick my C letter again. I'm going to choose R. It kind of makes sense just because you're finding the extremes again, just like you did in the last segment. Red and white are the extremes. Roan is the blended hybrid. So what you have is CR, CR, white, CW, CW, and then Roan, you would be the C. You can pick which one you want to put first. Maybe it's alphabetical. I'll do the R first. So this would be the hybrid outcome, the heterozygous, where you pair the 2 alleles. Again, there's only 2 alleles over here. You still make 3 phenotypes, just like you did in incomplete dominance. That's why this is very much confused with that previous one. The difference is what happens with the heterozygous. If the 2 alleles stay independent of one another, it is codominance and should be notated exactly in this format. If it is something where it blends together, pull up my last one. If it blends together, then you are going to have to pick this notation because that would be incomplete dominance. Okay? So that's, why they are so, it's just that minute detail of what happens here, but the notation in this chapter is probably one of the difficult things that students find is choosing which one. You can interpret it however you want with your own notation, but unfortunately, this chapter is about communicating your genotypes to someone else without you being there. So you can't just pick the ignoring all these base letters and do the BB, BW, WW and write this key. That's not how it kind of approaches. You have to make sure that you're writing the notation. That will give you full credit. If you mix up your notations, you obviously would not on a test get that full credit. But that is a common example of codominance. The most common example of human codominance, and what I'll do, I think I'm going to make a different video specifically, but that deals with blood typing, okay? But this would be a example of just the most common codominant situation that is non-human, and I think that was a good introduction there. So hopefully that helped. If you have any questions, let me know.